Hello. Welcome back to my channel. I am Monet and you're watching Life is Monet. The first month of the year is over and it's been a rocky reading experience all month. I've had some really great hits, some really interesting reads, and quite a few disappointments. One of the first books that I finished in the month of January was Little Thieves. This was my first Goose Girl retelling. Actually, I don't even think I've ever read the actual or seen the actual Goose Girl story, so I don't have anything to compare it to, but my reading experience for this one was quite interesting. Off the bat, I thought that we had a really multi-layered main character. She was unapologetically immoral, and I thought that the world building in this book was very interesting. I remember literally in the beginning of this book fully understanding the hierarchy and the magic system in this world and the limitations that the low gods had when interacting with each other. There is this court of gods within this book that do deal out sentences, and our main character is in a situation where if she gets caught, she will be brought forth between this court of like low gods, and she is the goddaughter of fortune and death. And even though they are gods, they're low gods, and there are certain restrictions and like limitations to how much they can actually help her. And then also the gods they don't have very many human-like sentiment, and so her godmothers have a hard time relating to her on a level of humanity and expressing things like pity and compassion. And so you have this main character that feels like she has to do absolutely everything on herself, and no one does anything without expecting something in return, because that's just how she has grown up dealing with having goddesses for godmothers. One thing that I found extremely interesting is the way that the humans in this world access magic, because they will take these leftover relics or artifacts that have been touched by gods, even low gods, and they will kind of grind them up into witch dust, and once they consume it, they have the ability to wield magic. But because this level of skill is not supposed to be wielded by humans, there is limitations on that as well, because they are subject to kind of losing their mind and going crazy and death. And so yes, you can access power and you can access magic, but then there's the question of how often do you want to keep doing this, and how much of a risk are you willing to put yourself at, because there are very deathly and just overall health complications that comes with humans touching into magic. I did feel like the romance in this book was very similar to Serpent and Dove, but done in a better way. There are a lot of comparisons to be made between the love interests that we have in this book and Lou and Reed in Serpent and Dove, except that she doesn't sing that very annoying big titty litty song that I know that got on everyone's nerves with Serpent and Dove, but she is just as promiscuous. And I find that I liked the main character in this book more than I liked Reed. There was a really engaging cat and mouse game that occurred between our love interests in this book. I felt like there was a lot of character development and payoff for this to be a first book. Honestly, this book could stand as a standalone. I know that it's supposed to be either a duology or a trilogy, I'm not exactly sure, but from where this book ends, I would say that it stands very strongly on its own. Now, I didn't give this 5 out of 5 stars because there were some things that kind of got on my nerves. I feel like the author took great liberties to stay true to the folklore aspect and to remind the readers that this was a retelling, but there are some shifts in the POV. Sometimes you jump into the past timelines, and she tells the history between some of the characters in this book through a fairy tale, and then you jump back into the present with no warning. And so when I was reading this book, I think I read about 60% physically, and the constant shifts between POVs and the constant jumping between timelines with no warning. There were no page breaks. There were no symbols or like little squiggly lines that an author might put to let the reader know, okay, we're going back into a different timeline or we're going back into the present. That was not in this book, and it got to be very annoying for me to have to keep shifting gears. It felt like driving a stick shift, and so that took away from my enjoyment of the book. That did change when I started listening to the audiobook, because I did switch to the audiobook for the last 40% of this book. So I ended up giving this book 3.5 out of 5 stars. So the next book that I read was actually a buddy read between me and Joshana, and that is going to be The Women of Chateau, Lafayette. As you guys can see from my tabs in this book, I had so much fun reading this book. Now, this is another book that I seen in the store, and the cover just pulled me towards it. And you guys know whenever I'm shopping, I shop off vibes, and I was just like, something about this book makes me want to pick it up and try it. It's a historical fiction, and I have some goals that I've set for myself in terms of my reading this year. I want to read more translated works, I want to read more classics, I want to read more historical fiction, and that is like my 3 goals for me picking up extra books throughout this year. And so with me having historical fictions in mind, I grabbed this one. Now, me and Joshana both loved this book, and I'm so glad that I got the chance to like read it with someone because it just heightened the enjoyment so much more. I am fairly confident that this is going to make it in my top reads of 2022, and it is literally only January, but I love this book enough to say that I feel like in December, I'm still going to be thinking about it, and I'm going to mention it in my end of the year content. So this book has 3 different female characters, all of which I came to love, and they are in 3 completely different timelines. Now, of the 3 characters that we follow, only one of them is entirely fictional. The 2 other women that we follow in this book are actual real women that have a history, a real legacy, and I feel like the author did such a good job remaining true to their story, but also like showing a more authentic side of them and like bringing them to life off the page. These are some of my favorite character works. Beatrice is someone that like I immediately was attached to, and I'm just raving. I haven't even told you guys what this book is about. But one of the first characters that we follow in this book is Adrian. Adrian is married to the French General Lafayette, and if you have studied the American Revolution, you would have heard his name. He is very revered both in America because he aided greatly in our fight to break away from the British crown, as well as once he left America, he went back home and he spearheaded the French Revolution there as well. And so you follow Adrian, who is this woman that is so supportive of her husband. She wants to believe in his ideas of like liberty and getting rid of this old ancient royal feudal system and just people having the right to vote and have a voice in their government. She wants to support that and she truly believes in it, but because of the social climate and just like everything that's happening around them, her faith and her belief in her husband is constantly put to the test. And there was so much historical truth in this book, but it does not overwhelm the reader. If you don't know anything about any of the 3 timelines in this book, you can still read this and enjoy it. And I honestly would recommend, as you're reading this book, to kind of Google some things as you go, because you will be shocked at how much historical truth is in here. But the way that she weaves it in, it is not knocking the reader over the head. On the other hand, if you did know a little bit about any of the 3 timelines in this book, that would just heighten your experience so much more. So we have Adrian, who is alive during both the American Revolution and the French Revolution, and her husband goes to America, meets George Washington, John Adams, Hamilton. He is just inspired by the American perspective and American way of life, and he comes back to France and he's like, this dream that I just fought, in America on American soil for, I want that to exist for our people. And then our second timeline is Beatrice. She is married to this person who is considered American royalty, and she's actually in Paris when World War I breaks out, and America is stuck on being neutral and not getting involved in the war, but she is in France and she is seeing what is happening to the people. Her nephew is also fighting in the war. There are so many American citizens who don't agree with the way that America has decided to handle the war, and they feel like they should be involved in the war. And so Beatrice launches this entire foundation that is centered around sending over much needed supplies and food and water and just entire medical kits to the people that are fighting on the front line. And she comes to a point where she's like, sending constant supplies over there is just not enough and we need to do more. And she is determined to get America involved in helping in the war. The way that these 3 women are connected is that Adrian's husband, Lafayette, was a noble in the French Empire. And so he owned a castle which was called the Chateau Lafayette. And hundreds of years into the future, during World War One, Beatrice takes Chateau Lafayette and she builds it back up and she opens it as a home to orphans that have been displaced from the war. One of these orphans that she ends up taking in is another character that we follow in the future, and her name is Marthe. Marthe is a character that grew up at the Castle Lafayette because she lost her parents during World War One, and she doesn't really know anything about them. She was just a baby when Beatrice found her, and she's actually grown up, and we're following her when the Nazi regime actually invades Paris, and she is stuck between wanting to help the Jewish people around her, but being afraid of just, again, the social climate and how she might be judged and how she may suffer the same fate of the same people that she is trying to help. So this book is a collective story of 3 different women alive during 3 completely different wars who have this story to tell that is centered around the Chateau Lafayette. It is a beautiful story. It is the perfect book to jump into for historical fiction. Even if you're not someone who reads historical fictions a lot, if you're even slightly interested, I highly recommend you pick it up because I enjoyed this book so much. Each one of these women are so different from one another, but I came to love them because their wins were my wins and their losses were my losses, and this was just such a fun book. I really enjoyed this. 5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was Wait For It by Mariana Zapata. This was a very, very slow crawl of a romance book. I was told that like Mariana Zapata was the queen of slow burn, but to call something a slow burn means that there has to be a certain level of like tension or steam or attraction happening. But when I say that like nothing was happening between our main love interest, Diana and Dallas, for such a long time. So this book is 670 pages. I don't think anyone even acknowledged their attraction to the other person until like more than 50% through this book. And like the first kiss happened like maybe 100 pages from the end of the book. Like literally I read over 500 pages before we even got a first kiss. Like this was a crawl. This was a crawl. But I'm a masochist, and so I loved it. It was a fun time. We got to follow Diana, who lost a really close family member of hers, and now she is responsible for raising the 2 kids that were left behind, and she has a lot of responsibility that's put on her. Her family is very I don't want to say judgmental, but her family has such high expectations and they expect her to like grow up and like get it right and to never mess up. And she just has literally the weight of the world on her shoulders, and she's still dealing with grief and loss, but she has to be there for these 2 little boys that she's raising, and she has to exhibit this strong facade for them. And then we have Dallas, who has he has stuff going on in his life as well, but I will say that I enjoyed the family dynamic in this book, and I found myself not really upset at how slow the romance was going or how long it was taking the romance to develop, because I genuinely liked Diana and I loved the 2 little boys that she was raising, and I enjoyed her friends. And she is not a character that I align with. A lot of the decisions that she made I would not have done myself, but she was so well done that like I understood her. We got to spend an intimate amount of time with her, and when we did like get the scenes of romance, I was shocked that by the end of this book I was sold on the romance, because for 700 pages we were moving so slow and they barely had a lot of on-page time. We spent so much time with just Diana and her raising the boys, but by the end of this book I felt like Dallas and Diana was just meant to be, and I believed it. I closed this book really sold that they are a couple that is going to stand the test of time and they're going to last a long time, and got like a little epilogue at the end that really solidified that for me. So when I read romance books, I am not always sold that these characters will grow old together. Like for an author to make me believe that says a lot about like how they sold me on the romance and how they built and just how they developed the romance overall. This is one of those books where it did that for me. Like I am completely confident that I will see a fan art of old ass Diana and Dallas together, because that is how much faith I have in them. With me trying to read more classics this year, I did manage to pick up a couple in the month of January. The first of those is going to be Animal Farm. So one of the last classes that I took to get my undergrad degree in history was a class on Russia, and literally the history of it from the fall of the last Tsar through the Cold War all the way up to Putin today. And I don't think, actually I know, I know for a fact that if I didn't have the knowledge that I did about the Soviet Union and just Russia's history in total, I would not have enjoyed this book as much as I did. But this was a complete rundown, a complete recollection of everything I know about the Soviet Union and Russia's history. And so I found it comical. I found this book extremely hilarious that this author put into 144 pages what took me, 8 to 10 weeks to learn in my course, and to see him allude to so much truth but use animals on a farm to tell this story was hilarious to me. I thought that George Orwell was a genius, and I enjoyed the bicker and the back and forth that happened between these animals. Now, I've seen people say that like the book was just ridiculous and it's just animals arguing with each other and they would just have much rather preferred reading Lord of the Flies, and I get that. I don't think that if I knew like exactly what it was he was referring to, that I would have enjoyed this book as much as I did. But I mean, down to the animals, down to the exact descriptions of the animals, I can point out who he was talking about in history, like a real person, because they acted exactly like these people. And the events that happened in this book can allude directly to real events that happened during the Soviet Union. And so I gave this 5 out of 5 stars because this is a man who is telling a story about communism in a time period where everyone hated communism. And so he changed the name, he changed the characters to animals, and he told them that this is not a book about communism, this is a fairy tale, and they took it and bought it and consumed it. And I think that that is fucking hilarious, that you changed and tweaked a few things and you got the masses to eat something they said they would never eat. This is a new favorite, 5 out of 5. And like I said, I don't know if I can recommend it, because if you don't know anything, it would just seem like pigs going at it on a farm and horses just being concerned with how they look. And it would seem very stupid. Like it would seem like a very convoluted dystopian. But for me, I had a great time. So the next classic that I managed to read in the month of January is going to be The Picture of Dorian Gray. This was a flop for me, for a lot of reasons. I think that in terms of reading classics in school and learning to analyze classical pieces of work and viewing it from a more critical mind, I don't think that there is another classic that I can think of that is this level of like understandable and provides this much of an easy introduction into classic works. So essentially, there's nothing wrong with the book. And I think that if I had read it in high school, I would have enjoyed it. But me in my adult life, I didn't enjoy this book as much. Essentially, we're following this character by the name of Dorian Gray. And Dorian is young and valiant and educated and wealthy. He's a wealthy noble, and he is concerned with all things that come with that. And he has this friend who is an artist who likes to paint pictures, and he paints a picture of Dorian Gray. And this friend has some very strong feelings for Dorian. And honestly, they're a little under the cover queer. They're a little homoerotic, his attraction that he has to Dorian. But during the time period that this book is in, you can't really say that. So we're just going to call him his really, really good friend. This friend has another friend who represents what I guess is going to be vain, egotistical, megalomaniac, like corrupt type person. This is the representation that this character has. He sees Dorian, he's like, yeah, you are beautiful. Like, you are a perfect example of a young, valiant white man. He pretty much sows this seed in Dorian's mind that Dorian needs to live his life to the ultimate fullest right now, because the way that he looks in this picture and the way that he's captured in this picture, he will not always look. Like, the picture will forever be perfect, and it's gonna forever show him in like the peak of his life, but he himself is going to become a product of his decisions. And right now is the perfect time for him to use the beauty and the youth that he has to sleep with whoever he wants and drink and party all night long. And Dorian is a very susceptible person. He's very impressionable. And so he makes this wish that the picture would get the brunt of his bad decisions, and the picture would grow old and ugly, and then he would remain forever beautiful. And then he proceeds to make a slew of terrible decisions, and he proceeds to live his life to the fullest. He's partying all the time, he's sleeping with a slew of women, and it's not exactly making him happy, and I guess he might not be happy because of the undercoverness, but yeah, he's sleeping with a bunch of women and it's not really making him happy. And he goes back to this friend, this Henry guy, and he's basically this asshole, this racist, sexist, misogynistic asshole, and he is loud and assertive and wrong. And one of the things that made me upset about this book is that just because you say something eloquently and you're the richest person in the room, it doesn't make you right. And normally rich people are the worst to give advice on terms of being moral and what morality and ethics is. And so we have this impressionable youth who has taken the advice of a very rich and problematic character, and no one has the intelligence to counteract him. No one can say something as eloquently as he did, and because he's loud and obnoxious about it, they take it as truth. Like, here's a rich, wealthy, well-to-do man, and he's saying something with pure confidence, and he's talking as if he's the smartest person in the room and everyone around him is stupid, and because he said it like that, it must be true. So no one has even the slightest level of IQ to challenge this person's authority. Like, they just give him overall authority. And that was one of the first things that got on my nerves within this book, because we have multiple characters within this story, all of which are supposed to be educated, but no one can challenge him. And as he starts to deal with the consequences of his choices, he goes on these very long soliloquies where he holds the reader's hand and he walks them through the process of him corrupting his soul and making one bad decision after another. And so there's a decline on his morality. And there's this huge dichotomy, because you don't have the common sense to tell this character no. Even if you can't challenge his level of intelligence, you don't have the self-will to tell him no. And so you indulge in all these nefarious behaviors, and you know what's happening to you because you're running on and on for 10, 20 pages on these long monologues about how you know you're becoming corrupt, but you're doing nothing to stop it. And so this is why I say that this is the perfect classic for you to analyze with the youth who may not be able to pick on overall themes, because the author takes great liberties to walk the reader to the destination that he wants them to be at. And that is not necessarily a bad thing, but it was the very long monologues that just bored the hell out of me. And so when I was sharing that with my friend, I was like, I feel like this would be better as a play, because that is the only place for soliloquies. I don't like them in my books. I tolerate them in my movies, but a character sitting there rambling about things of the mind and the heart is something that I expect a play actor to be doing. And so they recommended that I actually read The Importance of Being Earnest, which is by the same author, but is actually a play. And I gave this one 5 out of 5 stars. I thought it was comical. I thought it was very funny and short. And I actually recommend this one. I had a good time with it. I feel like the format in which I read The Picture of Dorian Gray was not the best, and that may have heavily impacted the way that I viewed the story. But yeah, I enjoyed The Importance of Being Earnest so much more. The next book that I read is The Deal of a Lifetime. This is a very, very short novella by Frederick Bachman. We have this character who has kind of always chosen work and his career over his wife and child, and he has come down with this terminal illness. So there's this character in this book who is supposed to represent kind of like the Grim Reaper, because she comes and collects souls, and he develops this relationship with her, and he starts to reflect on the decisions that he's made in his life and how much of a negative impact they have had on his son, and how at the end of his life he has so much wealth and really no one to share it with, because he has lost what is supposed to be the most important thing to him in his life, which is his family. I love the way that Frederick Bachman can put such strong themes and emotional pulls in such a short book. I think that this book is less than 90 pages, maybe 50 or 70 pages. It is so short. I think that it's a talent to be able to put this level of creativity and genius into such a short book, and I really enjoyed this. I believe that I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. So the next book that I read was To Sleep in a Sea of Stars. This was I tried to read this book physically twice and it didn't work out. And I tried to listen to the audio twice and it didn't work out. So whatever time this was for me to try and read this book, I gave it my all. I was really determined to finish this book this month and like finally get it off of my TBR. But I could not do it. It was so damn boring. I mean, it was such a slug to get through. I felt every word. I felt every word of this book. It never felt like I was actually in the story. I never got into the groove of reading. It became a chore to pick this book back up. So I DNF'd this book again and I am done. It is an unhaul. For those of you who read this book and loved it, I wished that that could have been me. But me and this book just never seemed to be cohesive with one another. And it sucks because it's such a beautiful cover, but it was a melatonin. It was a 900-page melatonin. I also attempted to take another DNF veteran off of my TBR list, and that is going to be Malice. Now, I've tried to read this book several times over the last 2 years as well, but I did manage to finish it. And so I feel so accomplished that like I finally read this book from beginning to end. And it was not good. I gave it 2. Did I give it 2? Yeah, I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. We never clicked. It was such a detached reading experience. Like I felt nothing. I was intrigued by nothing. If I wasn't determined to like finish this book, I would have DNF'd it and unhauled it along with To Sleep in the Sea of Stars. But I finished it. I'm still gonna unhaul it with To Sleep in the Sea of Stars. So there's that. The next book that I read was actually for a live show that I did with Erin over on her channel, which is Booked and Busy, and that is Sex Cult Nun. This was a very interesting read. So we're following Faith as she tells the story of her life growing up on a commune in a family that is a part of this cult. Now the cult used to be known as the Children of God, but today it goes by the Family International, and the founder of this cult was actually her grandfather. And this cult had a history of being very forward and promiscuous in terms of sex, and they heavily encouraged the women in this cult to be very sexual. And there was even this idea of like using sex to lure people to God and to lure them to believing in God and joining the family. And she does not tell her story in a dramatic way. I think that the way she tells her story is actually very thoughtful, and because this way of living was so normal to her, she writes it in that way. Like the way that she tells some of the more traumatic things that have happened to her, she writes about it as if it's just another Tuesday, as if it's just a walk in the park. And I get why she did that, because it was for her. It was something that was normalized to her. And you don't know that something is not normal until you go out into the world and you compare your life and your experiences at home against the lives of other people, against your classmates. But she was raised on a commune, and so every other youth that she interacted with had a life that looked exactly like hers, and their home life was extremely similar to hers. The way that she writes and like move past these scenes will be overwhelming to the reader. And so I highly recommend looking at the trigger warnings before you decide to pick this up, if you're even thinking about it, because she is very open and very honest, and she doesn't write in a dramatic way at all. But to someone who is emotionally susceptible to this, even though she's not being dramatic with the way she's telling the story, it still impacts the readers, because those of us who didn't grow up on a commune and we weren't raised in like this cult that used sex a lot and normalized sex with children, it is very weird for us. Next month, we're going to be reading Blood and Iron, and this is about the rise and the fall of the German Empire. And this is also going to be a very fun one because me and Erin have a background, educational background in history. So you guys guys join us for that. It will be on my channel towards the end of the month, and of course I will put information about that as the month continues. And you can also find information on the live show dates on both of our social medias, specifically Instagram. I highly recommend that you follow me and Erin on Instagram so you can get the live show dates for this. I hope to see you guys at the end of this month as we talk about the German Empire. So speaking of nonfictions and Germany, I read another nonfiction this month, and it is called Blitz. This documents the uses of drugs by Hitler and his Nazi regime throughout World War II. And I found this so interesting. It is very short. I believe the audiobook was only 7 hours long, but the amount of information that I took away from this book will forever stay with me. There were so many like random spotted facts throughout this book that just really stuck with me. And it's not something that is always talked about because of the image that Hitler wanted to portray around himself and his Nazi soldiers of being upstanding, honorable men who are just morally good and they're doing the work for the people. The amount of work that went into planning out their haircuts and their uniform, making sure that they look clean cut and just like respectable all around. Hitler depended on drugs when he was launching his imperialistic fascist campaign. He was very addicted to heroin. He was very addicted to cocaine, and that heavily impaired his decisions and the decisions of his higher ranked advisors around him because everyone was doing it. I also learned a lot about just Germany's history with drug use in total. I didn't know that so many of the drugs that were consumed during this time period, even in America, were manufactured in Germany. And one of the reasons why their economy took such an impact after World War II was the hit to their pharmaceutical production. And just learning that before the war, having drugs that was made in Germany brought about this level of like prestige. Like if you wanted top of the line, high-end drugs, to say that it was imported from Germany was a good thing. Like everybody wanted to get their hands on it. And so they made a lot of money around selling drugs to countries all over the world, including America. So this was such a fun nonfiction book. I am glad that I read it. I left much more enlightened and knowledgeable than I was before I went into the book. The last two books that I read in January are going to be romances. The first one is going to be The Simple Wild. This is by K.A. Tucker. Last year I read A Fate of Wrath and Flame by K.A. Tucker, and although she is a very well-known author in the romance world, this is the first time that I had heard of her in the first book that I read from her, and I loved it so much. I have a blog of my reading experience, and so many of my subscribers and friends have grabbed A Fate of Wrath and Flame to read it after me, and they have enjoyed it as much as I did. But on social media, when I see K.A. Tucker, it is not A Fate of Wrath and Flame that is talked about, which had me intrigued because I'm like, that is such a good book. But everyone keeps talking about her Wild series, and so I grabbed the audio for The Simple Wild, and I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. The character work and the pacing is something that I really enjoyed in A Fate of Wrath and Flame, and she came through just as well in this book. The character development, the relationships, the steam was just there. I was loving the banter between Calla and Jonah in this book, and Jonah I love. Like, I really loved his personality, and I was shocked that this is a series because I'm like, how do you have a romance series where we follow the same characters throughout 3 books and a novella? But the way that this book ended was so perfect, and I cannot wait to read the rest of the books in this series because it was such a fun time. Like, when I think of a perfect romance, this is it. And the last book that I read was Reminders of Him by Colleen Hoover, and this covered some very heavy topics as well. We are following this character by the name of Kenna, who has just gotten out of prison from doing 5 years for involuntary manslaughter of someone who was very close and dear to her. And she lost her daughter when she was serving her time in prison, and she just wants to get back into her daughter's life, but the grandparents don't want anything to do with her, and they have some very strong sentiments of dislike and disdain towards her. And one friend of the family that has a very close relationship with her daughter, she meets up with him, and they have this relationship that sparks between them. But their interactions with each other puts the relationship that he has with her daughter at risk, as well as any chance that she might have of talking to her daughter again at risk as well. And I enjoyed everything about this book except the romance. I was not sold on the romance. It moved way too quickly. I did not believe that what they felt for one another was true or real. I think that they were just grieving people who were grieving the same person, and there was a jumble mix of feelings that made them vulnerable and made them want to feel a sense of connection. And so because I felt like they were just coping with one another, it took away from the realness and like truthness of the romance to me. And so I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. That is just my personal opinion. I still recommend that you guys read it. It was not a bad book in any way, but I think that when you have two people that are in a situation similar to theirs, who are lonely and want to feel something other than just the grief and the sadness that they have inside, and then we build this entire relationship around that, it doesn't really make for a stable foundation of a relationship to me. And because the book is so realistic and the situations that they're put in is so realistic, like Colleen Hoover wanted this to be a real life story that characters could relate to, is why I still hold that against the book, because she wanted this book to be taken more than at face value because of the way that she wrote it. She wanted it to be real. And so I feel like my sentiments around the relationship is valid, because if we're telling a real story with, you know, real characters, that's the image that you want to portray, then they're going to have real issues in their future. And yeah, those are all of the books that I read in the month of January. Like I said, some were really good, some were bittersweet, and some have made me really excited to read more books from those authors. Thank you guys for watching this video. If you have made it to the end, leave me a star emoji, and I will see you guys in my next video.